In 1692, the town of Salem, Massachusetts descended into one of the most terrifying legal episodes in American history. 20 people were executed, not for murder, not for theft, but for witchcraft. The court accepted something called spectral evidence. That meant a witness would claim a witch appeared to them in a dream, and that claim alone was enough to send someone to the gallows. There was no burden of proof, no cross-examination, no right to a proper defense. 19 people were hanged on Gallows Hill. One man, Giles Curry, refused to enter a plea and was pressed to death under heavy stones over the course of 2 days. In total, over 200 people were accused. 90 confessed under torture just to survive. The governor's wife was accused before he finally shut the trials down. Years later, the colony formally apologized and paid reparations to the victims' families. The Salem Witch Trials weren't an accident. They were a legal system, working exactly as designed, with no safeguards to stop it. In 399 BC, the city of Athens puts its most famous philosopher on trial for 2 crimes: impiety, meaning disrespect to the gods, and corrupting the youth of the city. The real reason was almost certainly political. Socrates had spent decades publicly humiliating the most powerful men in Athens by exposing the gaps in their thinking. He was brought before a jury of 500 citizens, an enormous panel even by today's standards. He defended himself with characteristic stubbornness. He didn't beg for mercy. He told the jury they'd be making a mistake they would regret. They found him guilty, 280 votes to 220, a narrow margin. Then they asked him to propose his own punishment. He suggested the state should honor him with free meals for life. The jury, insulted, voted for death, by a larger margin than their guilty verdict. Socrates was sentenced to drink hemlock. He refused to escape, even when his friends arranged it. He died because he believed the law, even a flawed law, had to be obeyed. In 1894, a French army captain named Alfred Dreyfus was convicted of treason, accused of passing military secrets to Germany. The evidence was thin, but Dreyfus was Jewish, and anti-Semitism was deeply embedded in the French military. He was publicly stripped of his rank and sent to Devil's Island, a brutal penal colony off the coast of South America. Then a new intelligence officer discovered the real spy, a man named Esterhazy. The army covered it up. Esterhazy was court-martialed and acquitted in under 3 minutes. The writer, Emily Zola, published an open letter, a Yakuza, directly accusing the French government of a cover-up and anti-Semitism. Zola was convicted of libel and fled to England, where public opinion was shifting. Dreyfus was eventually retried, convicted again, but then pardoned. Full exoneration didn't come until 1906. The Dreyfus Affair didn't just expose one corrupt court. The international outrage it generated directly contributed to the creation of modern human rights protections in European law. In 1925, a high school biology teacher named John Scopes was put on trial in Dayton, Tennessee for teaching evolution to his students. It was literally illegal. Tennessee's Butler Act, passed just months earlier, made it a criminal offense for any public school teacher to teach any theory denying the divine creation of man. The American Civil Liberties Union had been looking for a test case to challenge the law. Scopes volunteered. The town of Dayton saw it as a chance for publicity and tourism. The ACLU recruited Clarence Darrow, the most famous defense attorney in America, to defend Scopes. The prosecution brought in William Jennings Bryan, a 3-time presidential candidate and devout Christian, to argue the other side. The trial was broadcast live on national radio, the first trial in American history to receive that kind of coverage. Preachers set up tents outside the courthouse. Crowds gathered from across the country. The whole nation was watching. Scopes was found guilty and fined $100, but a conviction was later thrown out on a technicality. The Butler Act itself wasn't struck down until 1968, 43 years after the trial, when the Supreme Court finally ruled anti-evolution laws unconstitutional. When World War II ended in 1945, the Allied powers faced a legal problem no court in history had ever encountered before. How do you prosecute an entire government for crimes of unprecedented scale when no existing law covered what they had done? There was no international criminal code, no precedent for holding leaders accountable for war crimes across borders, no framework for what the Nazis had done, the systematic murder of 6 million Jewish people and millions of others. So the Allied powers created one, right there, from scratch, in a courtroom in the German city of Nuremberg. They invented the legal concept of crimes against humanity, acts so severe that no government could sanction them and no order could justify them. 24 of the most powerful surviving Nazis were put on trial, 12 were sentenced to death by hanging, 7 received prison sentences, 3 were acquitted. Hermann Göring, once the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany, cheated the executioner by smuggling a cyanide capsule into his cell and swallowing it the night before his scheduled execution. Nuremberg didn't just punish war criminals, it built the entire framework of international criminal law that still governs war crimes prosecutions and human rights tribunals today. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were American civilians, a husband and wife from New York, who were accused at the height of the Cold War of passing atomic bomb secrets to the Soviet Union. The prosecution's star witness was Ethel's own brother, David Greenglass, who claimed Ethel had typed up classified documents containing nuclear weapon designs and handed them over. Both Julius and Ethel maintained their innocence throughout the entire trial. The evidence was largely circumstantial. No physical documents were ever produced. The case rested heavily on testimony. They were convicted in 1951 and sentenced to death. Despite international appeals and petitions, including from Pope Pius XII and Albert Einstein, both were executed in the electric chair on June 19, 1953. Julius went first. Ethel required 5 electric shocks before she died. Decades after the execution, Soviet-era records confirmed that Julius Rosenberg was indeed a spy. But the evidence against Ethel was far weaker than prosecutors had let on. David Greenglass later admitted he had lied about Ethel's involvement to protect his own wife from prosecution. Many historians now believe Ethel was executed simply to increase pressure on Julius to confess and name other spies. He never did. On the morning of August 4, 1892, in the town of Fall River, Massachusetts, Andrew Borden and his wife Abby were found hacked to death in their home with a hatchet. Their daughter Lizzie was the only person in the house. The evidence against her was substantial. She had tried to purchase prussic acid, a poison, at a local pharmacy the day before the murders. She burned a dress in the kitchen stove 3 days after the killings, telling a neighbor it was stained with paint. She gave contradictory statements to police about her whereabouts that morning. The physical evidence was consistent with her proximity to both murders. And yet, at her trial in 1893, the all-male jury acquitted her after just 90 minutes of deliberation. Historians have long argued that Victorian gender norms played a decisive role. The idea that a well-bred church-going woman from a respectable family could commit a double hatchet murder was simply unthinkable to the men on that jury. Lizzie Borden was never convicted of any crime. She lived another 34 years in Fall River, spending her inheritance freely, and never once made a public statement about the murders. The killer was never officially identified. The case has never been closed. In the summer of 1969, members of Charles Manson's cult carried out a series of brutal murders in Los Angeles, including the killing of actress Sharon Tate and 6 others over 2 nights. Manson himself wasn't present at the killings. His prosecution hinged on proving he had directed murder from a distance, through followers so completely under his control that they were willing to commit murder on his instruction. The prosecution's task was to prove that directing murder, even without being physically present, made Manson equally guilty of it. This required convincing the jury of the conspiracy theory of murder liability, that a person who plans and commands a killing is as legally culpable as the person who pulls the trigger. Manson made the trial a spectacle. He appeared in court with an X carved into his forehead. He acted as his own lawyer at times. His female followers shaved their heads and camped outside the courthouse for the duration. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death, later commuted to life when California temporarily abolished capital punishment. The Manson trial permanently expanded how American law applies conspiracy doctrine to cult leaders and those who killed through psychological control. On the night of June 12, 1994, Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman were found stabbed to death outside her Brentwood condominium in Los Angeles. Within days, her ex-husband, former NFL star OJ Simpson, was named the prime suspect. On June 17th, instead of turning himself in as agreed, OJ climbed into the back of a white Ford Bronco driven by his friend, Owl Collins. Police followed. The slow-speed chase was broadcast live on national television. An estimated 95 million Americans watched. The evidence that followed was overwhelming. OJ's blood at the crime scene, the victim's blood in his car and home, a bloody glove matching one found at the scene discovered at his estate. But his defense team, led by Johnny Cochran and including F. Lee Bailey and Alan Dershowitz, executed one of the most strategic courtroom reversals in history. They didn't fight the evidence directly. Instead, they put the LAPD itself on trial, exposing contaminated samples, mishandled evidence, and racist conduct by lead detective Mark Furman, who had been recorded using racial slurs dozens of times. The trial ran 252 days, the longest criminal trial in California history at that point. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, not guilty on all counts. The OJ trial cracked American society along racial lines and permanently changed how defense attorneys approach forensic evidence in criminal cases. Ted Bundy was one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. Charming, handsome, articulate, and a former law student who confessed to 13 murders before his execution, though the true number may be higher. What made his 1979 trial remarkable wasn't just the crimes, it was how he chose to face the legal system. Bundy fired his attorneys and represented himself in court. He cross-examined witnesses, he filed legal motions, he conducted himself with the procedural fluency of someone who understood exactly what he was doing. During testimony, he proposed marriage to his girlfriend, Carol Ann Boone, while she was on the stand, a legal maneuver that under Florida law at the time meant the proposal constituted a valid marriage ceremony. The trial was the first serial killer case broadcast nationally on American television, attracting enormous media attention. Young women packed the courtroom gallery to watch him. He was convicted of the murders of two Florida State University students and sentenced to death. Additional convictions followed for the murder of a 12-year-old girl. Bundy was executed in the electric chair on January 24, 1989. Crowds cheered outside the prison. His trial forced courts across the country to rethink the rules around self-representation in capital murder cases, because the system had no good answer for a defendant who understood it better than most lawyers. On December 13, 2003, U.S. forces found Saddam Hussein hiding in a narrow underground hole on a farm near his hometown of Tikrit, Iraq. He was disheveled, disoriented, and captured without a fight, a sharp contrast to the image of absolute power he had projected for 24 years as president of Iraq. He was handed over to the Iraqi Special Tribunal and charged with crimes against humanity, specifically the 1982 massacre of 148 Shia Muslim men and boys in the town of Dujail, ordered after a failed assassination attempt against him. The trial was volatile from the start. Saddam refused to acknowledge the court's legitimacy. He dismissed his lawyers and hired his own team. He launched hunger strikes. He gave speeches from the defendant's chair. 3 defense lawyers were assassinated during the proceedings. Throughout it all, Saddam remained defiant. When the judge read his verdict on November 5, 2006, guilty of crimes against humanity, Saddam shouted political slogans and called the court a fraud. He was hanged on December 13, 2006, at an Iraqi army base. Someone present filmed it on a mobile phone. The video leaked worldwide within hours, showing his executioners taunting him moments before his death. Human rights organizations condemned the trial as flawed. The victims' families called it justice. Both positions are still argued today. On July 15, 2008, Casey Anthony called 911 to report her 2-year-old daughter Kaylee missing. During those 31 days, Casey had told her family that Kaylee was with a babysitter named Zenaida Gonzalez, a woman who turned out not to exist. Casey had been photographed at nightclubs, at a bar, and getting a tattoo that read Bella Vita, Italian for the beautiful life. When Kaylee's skeletal remains were finally found in a wooded area near the family's home in December 2008, duct tape was found near her skull. Casey was charged with first-degree murder. The prosecution built its case on circumstantial evidence, computer searches from chloroform and how to make chloroform on the family computer, a forensic claim that the smell of human decomposition had been detected in the trunk of Casey's car, and the sheer weight of her 31 days of lives. But no one could prove exactly how Kaylee died. The cause of death was officially undetermined. The defense argued it was an accidental drowning covered up in panic. The jury believed, or at least couldn't disprove, that story. Casey Anthony was acquitted of murder after 11 hours of deliberation. The verdict sparked immediate national outrage and reignited a debate about what the legal standard of reasonable doubt is actually supposed to mean. On the morning of November 2, 2007, British student Meredith Kircher was found murdered in the apartment she shared with American exchange student Amanda Knox in Perugia, Italy. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed. Knox and her Italian boyfriend Raffaele Solicito were arrested within days. Knox later signed a statement. which it said was coerced during a lengthy interrogation, implicating her boss, Patrick Lumumba, who turned out to be innocent. In 2009, both Knox and Solicito were convicted of murder and sentenced to over 25 years. In 2011, an Italian appeals court acquitted both of them, citing serious flaws in the forensic evidence. In 2014, both were convicted again. In 2015, the Supreme Court of Cassation acquitted them definitively and finally. The Knox case put two entirely different legal philosophies in direct conflict. In the United States, double jeopardy, being retried after an acquittal, is constitutionally banned. In Italy, acquittals can be appealed and retried by the prosecution. The case became a global debate about which system is more just and whether either one got it right. In the early hours of Valentine's Day 2013, Oscar Pistorius, the South African Paralympic sprinter, had competed against able-bodied athletes at the 2012 London Olympics, fired 4 shots through a locked bathroom door in his home in Pretoria. Behind the door was his girlfriend, model and law graduate Reba Steenkamp. She was hit 3 times. She died before paramedics arrived. Pistorius told police he had heard sounds in the bathroom during the night and believed an intruder had broken in. It said he fired in fear, not knowing Steenkamp was behind the door. Prosecutors argued it was deliberate murder, that the couple had argued at night, that Steenkamp had locked herself in the bathroom to escape him, and that Pistorius shot through the door knowing exactly who was there. South Africa does not use juries. The verdict rested entirely with Judge Thokozile Masipa. Her first verdict in 2014 was culpable homicide, roughly equivalent to manslaughter. The prosecution appealed. The Supreme Court of Appeal overturned it and replaced it with a murder conviction in 2015. In 2017, Pistorius was resentenced to 13 years and 5 months. The case showed how a bench trial, decided by one judge rather than 12 jurors, can produce radically different outcomes, and how the same set of facts can support 2 completely opposite conclusions. On Christmas Eve 2002, Lizzie Peterson, 8 months pregnant with a son she and her husband Scott had already named Connor, went missing from their home in Modesto, California. Scott told police he had spent the day fishing alone at San Francisco Bay. He said he came home to find Lizzie gone and their dog wandering in the backyard with his leash on. In April 2003, the bodies of Lizzie and her unborn son washed ashore near the bay where Scott said he had been fishing that day. No murder weapon was ever found. No eyewitnesses. No definitive crime scene. The case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence, a secret affair Scott had been having with massage therapist Amber Frey, life insurance policies, the suspicious coincidence of the bodies washing up in the exact location Scott claimed to have been, and fertilizer residue in his boat consistent with the type of weight that may have been used. The jury convicted Scott Peterson of first-degree murder of Lacey and second-degree murder of Connor, and sentenced him to death. In 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned the death sentence due to juror misconduct during the selection process, and he was resentenced to life without parole. Salem in 1692 to Scott Peterson in 2004, 15 trials where a courtroom changed something permanent. Which trial shocks you the most? Drop it in the comments below. Thanks for watching.